Hey, it's Drybear. Dragon's Dogma 2 has been catching a major hype train, and it's almost here. Just inside of a week, we will all get our hands on Dragon's Dogma 2 to play for the first time. And as it often does, the hype train has brought out the people that believe that Dragon's Dogma 1 is one of the best RPGs ever made, and are singing its praises across the rooftops, as well as the people that don't think it's all that great, and everyone in between. And while no one's necessarily wrong here, it's the cool thing to do is to believe in what you like and the subjective reality you live in, and what you enjoy in your recreation is entirely up to you. But the hype for DD2 has encouraged people to pick up Dragon's Dogma 1, Dark Arisen, and try it out for the first time without having played it before. And this includes notable streamers and content creators that show off games through their own unique gameplay. And while I'm in the camp that Dragon's Dogma 1 is one of the best RPGs ever made, it definitely has its flaws. And so today I'd like to highlight a very core issue to Dragon's Dogma 1 and the style of Dragon's Dogma development that will be continuing in Dragon's Dogma 2. And this issue is easily highlighted by the well-known content creator Asmongold picking up the game for the first time and playing it on stream. See, the vision for Dragon's Dogma 1, and consequently the vision for Dragon's Dogma 2, is to not be overly hand-holdy. It's not to deliver you a story-based experience on rails that you'll go from A to B to C very easily without having to put much thought into it. And in fact, it's designed for you to get stuck and lost and run into difficulty walls that you can't overcome initially, and will have to think and reconfigure your strategies in order to actually move forward in the game. But on top of that, it is quite atypical in how it presents itself and the systems that it utilizes, which means that many people that are used to other mainstream games can't really lean on their learned experience or muscle memory as much as they can with other titles. And so some of the conversations that sparked from Asmongold playing this game happened when the game came out and have been talked about ever since. And Asmongold, understandably struggling with some of the new mechanics for Dragon's Dogma 1, have led to comments like, "He's the reason why ledges are painted yellow. I don't want to hear Asmon talk about hand-holding in video games ever again. He's literally the reason why it exists. I hope the please play Baldur's Gate crowd shut up after watching this. He literally grabbed Rook and didn't notice it was the reason for his overweight," which, by the way, I'm pretty sure he was just trolling chat at this point to get a reaction out of you. "The fine line between you're telling me this game doesn't hold my hand, that's great, and I haven't paid attention this whole time, and I have no idea what to do now," is a fine line indeed. You didn't use skills, you didn't block, you didn't do jack, you were just existing in combat. And finally, the comment that best encapsulates what I want to talk about in this video: "I'm sorry, but there's no way he'll make it through DD2 if he can't even read and do simple mechanics in DD1. And as a quick aside, I'm not going to jump into the complexities of trying to learn something new while being constantly judged by outside eyes, and how that affects your mental process in absorbing new information and seeing things. And honestly, only people that have streamed with an audience that are constantly interacting with that audience can relate to how disruptive that can actually be, because you have so many other voices in your head. You look over and you see chat with criticisms, with people pointing you in every which way, some people giving you good advice, some people pointing out things that aren't even there just to troll you, some people trying to say mean things just to get a rise out of you, and some people just giving you false information that don't help you at all. So realistically, there's going to be a ton of this if you have a lot of people watching you and you're actually engaging with those people in real time while you're playing a new game. And if you want to be a good content creator and entertainer, you generally will sensationalize some things just to play up the interaction, which I'm pretty sure happened with him picking up Rook and being over encumbered and dropping items on the ground to drop his weight, even though he knows he's obviously over encumbered because he's carrying one of his pawns on his back. But I digress. Let's dive into all of the things that Dragon's Dogma will do to you as a player, and I hope that this video accomplishes helping people get over the hurdles that they will be presented with, very likely in almost all of Dragon's Dogma 2. Because I absolutely love Dragon's Dogma 1, and I'm saddened by the people that didn't get to play it because they didn't pass the Great Bandit filter, or they couldn't find their way to a quest, or they got stuck on a path or didn't have a way to go, or there weren't enough indicators to give them a direction. And undoubtedly, the style of Dragon's Dogma 2 will filter some players out this way as well. And the first thing to touch on is what to do when you get stuck or lost in Dragon's Dogma 2, which will happen by design. You need to set your mentality as one that you're coming into this as a bright open world where you're dropped in place without much direction and you explore and find things. And unlike games that are meant to be on rails, everywhere you look there are meant to be things that you will discover that will have actual value. You might find a random cave that you couldn't see from any other direction but the one standing right in front of it. You enter into it and clear it out, and then you find a journal piece that when you read it leads to another unknown location that you couldn't find on the map or elsewhere unless you had the journal piece. You'll find pieces of a key that when forged together opens a wall in a mountain that didn't exist before. A slab written in a language you can't read that you'll have to keep with you and carry to town to have someone translate it so you can understand what it's saying. You might find hidden passages behind waterfalls that aren't visible that open brand new dungeons that you didn't even know existed. And I think over the years, playing mainstream titles, we've kind of trained our brains to think that it may be a waste of time to follow the edge of the map, because maybe it's just a skybox that's there to look pretty, or maybe they just put environment assets to block you off and make the world seem full, when really you're just supposed to follow the rail you've been placed on. That's one of the reasons why Dragon's Dogma is so unique and special, in that you can just go in any direction that you want, do anything that you want, and you will be rewarded for exploring the world around you. So you can play the game any way that you want when you pick up Dragon's Dogma 2, but I implore you as a suggestion to simply just take your time and go step by step. Explore the tiles around you, go over mountains and hills, go through the forest, check underwater, go through rivers, try things to see if they work, because the game has been developed with that strategy in mind. Additionally, because there isn't really any fast travel in the game, you're limited to on foot or using ox carts for the most part. It is kind of reinforcing that idea of it wants you to find your own way to where you're going, stumble upon unique things that you didn't know you were going to run into, and fighting monsters that you didn't know were there. The game also encourages experimentation with its vocation system, the passives that it has, and the pawns that you bring along with you. This is definitely one of those games where if you can think it, you should try to make it happen. So see if you can combine things together in new ways to create your own playstyle with the vocations that you have available and the goal of the experience you're trying to create. So that covers getting stuck or getting lost in the world. The next thing is when you run into difficulty spikes. Now, as someone who has worked almost a decade in game development directly, I can tell you that a great deal of effort and research goes into smoothing out the experience for players. If people hit too big of a difficulty spike, they're likely to close out your game and never play it again, or refund it, or tell other people not to play it because it's not very good. And so most modern games have spent a lot of time trying to smooth out the experience so that everyone can get involved and it reaches a wider audience. This is generally just a good tactic for making as much money as possible on a game, and even games that are really well made will have this implemented into it. And sometimes this new idea in the last 10-20 years that we've developed for gaming goes even too far. So if you've played the new God of War 2018 or God of War Ragnarok, you know that sometimes when you walk up to a puzzle, the NPC with you might already start telling you how to solve it before you've had a chance to look around. 2023, we saw a lot of conversations online going over hand-holding in games, marking ladders with yellow paint or ledges with yellow paint, or having the main character narrate what he has to do next or what she has to do next before you have had time to figure it out for yourself. And while I think these systems are good in theory, they probably should have an option to toggle on or off depending on the experience you're looking for, because some people really appreciate not having to rack their brains on what they could possibly do next, where they get frustrated and close the game, and then they lose the whole point of playing a video game, which is really meant for recreation in the first place. Never let anyone tell you to have fun in your own free time, because that's up to you entirely. And if you're someone weird like me who likes to just struggle and run your forehead against a brick wall over and over until you finally get it and enjoy the satisfaction of having done so, or you're someone who really just likes to be there for the action and the story, and you don't want to run into a whole bunch of hiccups and hurdles and walls that just burn you out or make you bored. And this is why, in general, games these days are more on the side of helping, hand-holding, tutorializing, and giving you all that information up front so that it doesn't lose players who might get frustrated easily. And so it's rare when we get a game like Dragon's Dogma that does the opposite, that it just drops you and they pull out a clipboard and watch you struggle and watch you fail, because they want you to really get invested in the role role-playing aspect of the world and actually get invested in the systems they've given you rather than just telling you exactly what the answer is. So if you run into difficulty spikes where you walked somewhere that maybe you shouldn't have, you weren't strong enough to go to this place yet, and you got absolutely obliterated, you might have to stop, pause, and think about your party composition, the gear that you have available for your characters, the level of your overall, your Arisen and your pawns, the vocations and tools that are there. Maybe you need to be using more magic, maybe you be using more physical, maybe it's a monster that you need to mount in order to deal damage to them. You will encounter lots of monsters in fights in Dragon's Dogma 2 where they are completely impervious to physical damage, which means that if you're an entirely physical party, like you have a warrior, a fighter, a thief, and an archer, you're not really going to be able to do much to a target that is invulnerable to all physical attacks, and the same goes to a target that is invulnerable to magical attacks. And so you are encouraged to reconfigure your party composition with you and your pawns so that you can cover most bases. If you find that you run into a difficulty spike where you're dying or falling apart and not accomplishing what you're trying to do, you may have to change vocations, you may have to dismiss some of your support pawns and bring in new ones that have different skill sets or higher level. And Dragon's Dogma is famous for being incredibly exclusionary with some of the tactics that the enemies will employ. I briefly mentioned the Great Bandit filter from earlier, but this is something that happens to almost every new player that tries Dragon's Dogma 1. They come in thinking they're hot, they set the difficulty to hard, they go out to the grasslands and they run into the bandits, and they get absolutely dominated because the bandit groups in the grasslands in early Dragon's Dogma 1 are seriously overpowered. The archer bandits will do knockback attacks and tripping attacks, the two-handed leader bandits do insane damage and have really high defenses, and some of the bandits that you fight have a mechanic where you have to counterattack them after they strike, which means that if you attack them before they attack, they'll take little to no damage. And there's not really much feedback that shows this as well, and hopefully if they do include more mechanics like this in Dragon's Dogma 2, that they represent it better by having visual feedback for the player to know that this is happening. But there's plenty of enemies in Dragon's Dogma 1 where you have to wait for them to swing and whiff, and then you attack them, and then all of a sudden you're doing a bunch of damage, whereas before their health bar wasn't moving at all. But if you weren't paying attention to the fact that you were doing no damage before, it might seem like the game is busted or the game sucks because you're not letting the game tell you exactly what's happening. The first time people enter into the well and fight the Saurians, they might find that they're under-geared or under-leveled, or they might not realize that in order to do maximum damage to the Saurians, you need to sever their tail. And until you sever their tail, they're a lot stronger and a lot more dangerous, and you want to focus on doing that. And a critique I've seen a lot about Dragon's Dogma 2 is that there isn't as much enemy variety as you would hope to see in an RPG, and I do believe that this is the reason why. There is a lot more depth with each individual enemy that you face. There's a trick, there's manipulations, there's statuses you have to be aware of, and conditions you have to meet to fight them properly. So rather than having a lot of enemy types, there's fewer enemy types, but those enemies have pretty hard lines on how you're supposed to engage with them. Some enemies have to be set on fire before you can do maximum damage to them. Some enemies need to be frozen. Some enemies need to be toppled before you can do maximum damage to them. And while it sets up these really harsh lines for the player to overcome, it also provides a bunch of tools for you to do so. When pawns grab a hold of an enemy that needs to be counterattacked to deal maximum damage, all of a sudden, while they're holding that enemy, you and your teammates can do maximum damage to them as if they had just counterattacked. So maybe you can grab the enemy or wait for a pawn to grab an enemy and take advantage of that opportunity when it presents itself. A big one in Dragon's Dogma 2 is going to be the sidesteps from thieves or the parries from warriors and fighters that can open these windows naturally through very strategic gameplay in the heat of the moment. You can also use your surroundings for better or for worse, and this is tied into the encounters you have with the unique enemies in Dragon's Dogma as well. Maybe an enemy with poison isn't too much of a big deal when you're out in the open air, but when you're inside a cave and they're spewing poison everywhere, it might be diluting the air with more and more poisonous particles that proves a bigger problem than it would be elsewhere. And so you're encouraged to find unique and clever ways to use the mechanics that are available to you to overcome the enemies you're facing. If an enemy that is bested by mounting comes along, maybe you can pick up a pawn and throw them up to their weak point so that they can get there faster and take them down. Or maybe you can grab a pawn and throw them at an enemy and have them grab, or use the ledges around you to push enemies back that might retreat, or have dodging mechanics. Use ways to bring aerial opponents down to you by entering into a cave with a low roof so that they have to fly to you, using your surroundings, using your tools, taking advantage of the unique aspects that your vocation and your specific party provides you to overcome the obstacles that are in your way. Even things like targeting are going to be more severe in this game, that are more like Monster Hunter targeting. You're not going to be able to lock on to a specific body part or look for a specific thing. It's going to be more in-field directional, so you may have to use your analog stick or use your mouse to point around in different areas to find the right spot on an enemy in order to deal the correct damage into the weak point that you need. Or maybe if it's something that's that precise, maybe your ranged characters focus on distraction or adds or dealing overall damage, while your melee fighters can focus on weak points that are generally hard to hit for the ranged characters. And so the point is that Dragon's Dogma is not your average everyday RPG, and you need to train your brain to expect the unexpected when you come in to play it to really get the full value out of it. If you come in thinking you're going to get another hack and slash adventure that's very normal and very straightforward, you might end up leaving dissatisfied, and I genuinely hope that more people don't end up in that same boat. And while not every mainstream game encourages you to spend the time to lift every stone, look behind every tree, and experiment with new ideas, this one definitely does. So come into Dragon's Dogma prepared to take your time with the map, use the travel that you have to the best of your ability, look for specific clues or details, listen to your pawns, and get immersed in the world so that you can actually enjoy it for all of its golden glory. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.